happens when you press it. So, hey everyone, and welcome back to Page Chewing, episode 52. So I'll let my wonderful and talented co-host Taylor from Maybe the Pages, introduce yourself first, and then we'll let our guest introduce themselves. So, hey Taylor, how's it going?
Hey, going great. I am, as always, very happy to be here. My name is Taylor from the BookTube channel, Maybe Between the Pages. I'm a co-host with PL on Page Chewing, and I'm delighted to be back on the Page Chewing screen. It's been a minute.
Yes, and of course, Page Chewing is nothing without Taylor. So we're so happy to be here with Taylor. And of course, our wonderful guest. We are honored today, Taylor and I, to have a best-selling historical fantasy author, none other than Shauna Lawless with us. So, hi, Shauna. Welcome. We'll let you say a few words about yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Shauna Lawless. As you say, I write historical fantasy. That is set in 10th century Ireland and uses a lot of Irish mythology as a basis for the magical system and the fantastical elements. My first book was The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, which came out last year. And my second book, The Words of Kings and Prophets, which I have here. It's out on Thursday. So that's very exciting for me. So that's sort of what I've been up to the last couple of weeks. A lot of BookTube promotion and kind of trying to get the word out that the second book is being released.
Wow, congratulations. And we're being joined by some friends. Eddie Castro, friend of the channel. Hi, Eddie. How are you doing? Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I know it's probably early for, especially Eastern time zone. It's very early. The three of us are all in different time zones. Sean, of course, in Ireland, Taylor in Japan, and myself on the east coast of Canada. Central Canada, really, not the east coast, but Eastern time. So, but thanks, Eddie, for joining us. So, Shauna, your book, Children's Gods and Fighting Men, it is fabulous. It's one of my favorite books this year. I can't say enough about it. If you forgive me, I'm probably going to gush a bit here, but it's you set this book and presumably this series up as, I guess, the comparators. It's compared very much to another one of my favorite series of all times, historical fiction series, The Last Kingdom, and it is. But like I said, I've only read the first book. I can't wait to grab the second. As soon as it comes out, I will be doing that in Canada. But yeah, it is phenomenal. Can you tell us a bit about your series, and specifically when we talk about comparatives to The Last Kingdom in terms of historical fiction, how do we get to that in terms of when we look at your series?
Oh, well, I'm a big fan of The Last Kingdom series. I started reading that, I think, once the third book was released. So way years ago when I was I must have been early 20s. And I loved it. I always loved classical fiction growing up as well. And there's something actually fantastical about going back in time, even if you don't put any actual magic into the story, because the world can be so. And so growing up in Ireland, it was obviously invaded by the Vikings, the same as in The Last Kingdom. But I didn't seem to be able to find as much information on the invasion in Ireland for a time. But as soon as I did a bit of digging, you can see there's a lot of history here, a little bit different to The Last Kingdom. But then that's always good. It's good that you kind of have differences that you can look at. But yeah, I mean, it's that kind of period of history that is very exciting, I guess. You've got like clashes of culture, clashes of religion. You have a society that is very different to now, but there's always similarities in societies. And there's lots of things that happen in the 10th century that happen in the 21st century. And so I find that all just like that melting pot just so interesting. But because I love The Last Kingdom so much, actually, when I started to write this series, I did think about who my protagonists would be. And it had to be a woman, because I find that when I started to write a male character, it just felt like Uhtred was had sort of like come into my story, because he's just such a wonderful character that exists in the Last Kingdom world. Like he really is the story. So the Last Kingdom is a great comparison, and it's a series that I love myself.
Wow, yes, and it's mine's all behind me on that shelf. I've read all of them, and they're fantastic. And I'm sure one day I'm going to have a top shelf, full of Shauna Lawless, series Gale Song. That's what I anticipate. So, I'm just going to quickly just pop back up that the wonderful Dr. Layla Gushi's up. Good morning, Layla from St. Louis. Thanks for joining us. And then we have some praise for your work, Shauna. So Eddie Castro says, had the honor of reading it last month. Thought it was awesome and can't wait for the next installment.
Oh, thanks, Eddie.
And then Layla adds, I agree, Eddie Castro, loved the first book and I'm waiting for the next. So lots of praise for Gale Song. I feel like your books, and it's funny you spoke about Uhtred and characters, and of course, Uhtred of Bedburg, I believe, is one of historical fiction's best characters, anywhere. However, now that I've read your book, Gormflaith is up there. He's getting up there. So I know it's only one book so far, but you had many wonderful characters in this book. Shauna, but Gormflaith, I'm in love with. She is, I love those morally gay characters. Taylor, who knows me, knows that. Gormflaith, she embodies so much of that strong woman, but someone who, she's in normally she's in this high role in society, or as high as a woman can have in that context. But in so many ways, she's completely stymied by the patriarchy. And that's what I loved about her character, especially that she's fighting against this patriarchy and trying to do what she can to be influential and steer events, but she's bogged down by this male dominated society. Was that something that you really want to convey with that character?
Yes, I think so. I suppose you're trying to set the scene to be historically accurate for the time. And women in Ireland did have power, and they had legal protection. So divorce was allowed. Women could instigate divorce. They had property rights and all those things. But realistically, when I was kind of looking at the historical setting of Ireland at that time, it's a culture that is fighting a lot. The Irish fight often between each other, but also now the Vikings have come in and they are also fighting the Vikings. And so I was trying to see sort of how would a queen be in this environment? Like, what actual power would she have? And of course, Gormla is a historical character as well. So we have historical records about her, and none of them are kind about Gormla. So I found that interesting as well. I think there has, maybe in the last 20 odd years, there's been a bit of a movement where female characters from history that have been kind of maligned have had retellings or kind of spins in their stories. So sort of someone like an Anne Boleyn kind of character would have been sort of traditionally seen as this sort of harlot who broke up Henry VIII's first marriage and all of this and caused religious chaos in England. But actually, modern historians would look at her as being someone that was really married off by her family. Her family wanted kind of more power at the Tudor court. And so this sort of evil Anne Boleyn character maybe isn't quite right. And so lots of characters have had that done in the last 20 years, from like Medusa to someone like Anne Boleyn, like all these kind of female characters. So with Gormla, I had that kind of thought as well. Like, do I want to make her a more sympathetic character and that these historical records are wrong. But then I kind of thought, no, I'm going to actually have her have these flaws and these faults, because everyone in Ireland at that time had the same flaws and faults. So Gormla was criticised for being ambitious, for being a warmonger, I suppose, for being scheming, which you can kind of all see happens in the first book. But loads of the kings at that time were the same, and probably would only wish that they were as clever as Gormla. So I was like, no, I'm not going to have her apologise for being all these things, because all the other characters are wanting to do the same things as her. She shouldn't be apologetic in that sense. So I had a lot of fun with that, because she is very morally grey. She does what's best for Citric, and she does what's best for herself, and she doesn't mind kind of walking over other people to achieve those objectives. So I find Gormla she's a lot of fun to write. And book 2 and book 3, she's she's fun in those books as well.
You couldn't have sold me on a character more from telling me that. But something that you said earlier that really struck me was that you were writing about 10th century, you said, correct? But that has a lot of parallels to where we are now in this world today. And just hearing you discuss these characters, how you're kind of interacting with their historical being and kind of bringing it into the present as well, kind of playing with those different contexts. Do you view the historical setting of historical fantasy as a way to have a conversation about the present, or is it more of just like that incidentally happens when you're writing?
No, I think that's something that I maybe sometimes do purposefully, because I think lots of those same issues exist. I think when we look at the past and the present day, we often think, well, I certainly did when I was younger, that, we're so much more evolved, we're so much more enlightened, everything is better, and kind of the past is this dark place where people were stupid and lived these lives that you can't even hardly imagine. But I think, again, once you get older and you start to look at history, you realize so many things are the same. So many issues are the same. And actually, in a way, it's easier to talk about present day issues via the context of fantasy stories and historical fiction, because you're not lecturing the reader. You're able to let the reader kind of think for themselves. That's what I'm always pushing for. I don't want to lecture. I want to provoke conversation and discussion. So in The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, Gormla stands over a trial where a young woman has been assaulted. And, that to me, that could have happened last week here, and kind of how the young girl is treated by everyone, that also could have happened last week here. There's so many things that happen that are bad in the modern day, and all our technology and all our enlightenment in a way hasn't helped cure all these things, but I think we think they have. So I think fantasy and historical fiction kind of provide that veil of separation that can allow you to talk about modern day issues in a way that's a little bit more detached, if that kind of makes sense, but also allows you to kind of have that conversation.
That makes complete sense. I often say it's a mirror image for us to look into, without realizing we're really looking at ourselves. That's one of the beautiful things about the genre. And I'm new to historical fiction. So I dabble. I dabble in it. PL's really the master of that. But I do find it so fascinating when people are in conversation with the past in the way that you just discussed. Like I said, you couldn't have sold me more on a book by saying that you're kind of playing with that. I think that's wonderful. Takes a lot of talent to do too. And I just have to say also, I saw your book suddenly everywhere. it exploded all over all of my social media. And as someone who, again, is not super into historical fantasy as much, to see that everywhere, I just have to say congrats for the success that you've seen with your series.
Yeah, it's hard, but that's really down to Head of Zeus, my publisher. I think the hardback when it came out did well. And they definitely have put a bit of investment when the paperback came out, and when it came out in America. So that's been great, and that's sort of what a good publisher can do. Either when they're traditionally published, they get your book out there. But also, I think it's also a lot of the support I had initially from BookTube and book bloggers. Who got on the book quite quickly, and I feel that the word of mouth has had a big impact as well. Whenever I look at my Goodreads figures, I get like 30 to 40 ratings a week, and every week, and so it hasn't lulled yet. It kind of seems to be still going, which can only be word of mouth, if you know what I mean. So that's been brilliant, actually. And I think, as I said before we started, the SFF community is so supportive. I don't see that in any other genre the way that we have it. There's such a great booktubing community, bookstagramming community on Twitter, everywhere. It's all so positive. I feel like with social media, I've had actually a great experience, and I haven't had to kind of block too many things, because mostly everything coming at me is good. Not just about my book, but about everyone's books,
Yeah, no, and kudos, yes, to the wonderful social media community. I echo what Taylor said. Congratulations, Shauna, on the success. Your book has truly been impactful. And is all the circles that I float in, people have heard about your book. They're talking about it. There's so much buzz about the follow-up, and yes, definitely one of the talked about books in historical fantasy, certainly in recent times. I just want to quickly put up again. I had it earlier, but our wonderful friend Chris Mohan from the channel, great booktuber himself. Check out his channel, Chris. How's it going? Sure, you've chatted to Chris a few times. Shauna, how far are you? Not too far away from Chris, probably?
No, I actually met Chris at my book launch last year. So there's wine this year as well, Chris, if you want to come down.
I'm so envious, man, that you're getting to hang out there. That's awesome. Headed to Glasgow for, World Fantasy Convention in 2024. So hoping to see a lot of people, perhaps yourself, Shauna, if you're headed down there, and Chris for 2024 in Glasgow. Eddie,
everyone seems to be going there. Everyone.
Come on, Taylor, you gotta find you gotta find your way there, man.
I'm being sold on it. I am. I'll have to talk to the hubby.
Okay, we'll keep needling you about it till you decide to book that ticket. Eddie, again, more praise for Shauna's books. That Shauna's ability to write characters and scenes just pulls you in. It's an amazing talent. That's what
Thank you.
has to say. Now I know that I'm all about Port Gormleth, but however, you do have many more wonderful characters. Definitely a character-based reader over here. If I can speak for Taylor, she is as well. So in some ways, you have a foil for Gormleth in the book, and that's Fumla. And she, in many ways, is, I guess you can characterize as a more pleasant character. One of those nicer ones that people will probably root for more unashamedly because of how she is. She's very courageous. She's intelligent. She's very nurturing and protective. But she has, at the same time, she has somewhat of a suspicious nature, and that's because she's had somewhat of a damaged past. And she's also I found, she's very willing to risk and sacrifice herself for others, but she has this pragmatism about her too, right? And she kind of she's like Gorflip, she puts the mission ahead of any one life, right?
Yes.
But can you talk a bit about her and how you perhaps, contrasted these two powerful, strong main female characters in your book?
Okay, yes. So Fola, I suppose, is a bit more of that kind of traditional nurturing mother. But I also wanted to make her be a strong person. I think sometimes that type of mother is kind of the person that gets killed normally in chapter 1 or 2. And so Fola came from that because I wanted her to be very different from Gormla, and she's a healer. So that's her. Like, healing is like her magical talent. So I wanted that kind of nurturing, kind side to be there. But also, she's sort of grieving. There's a sadness in her. She wants everyone to be safe, not just herself. And in some ways, her and Gormla go on very similar journeys. They're living in the same country, all the same things are happening, but their personalities and their desires that gives them very different arcs. And so Fola is a very important character to me. She really represents kindness and like a lot of positive qualities, but also she's afraid and doesn't always act as she wants. And I think that's quite realistic. I think whenever people read the book, more people will be a Fola than a Gormla. And that is something, that's been true with myself, that you can be afraid sometimes to do the right thing or to say the right thing. And, she's a little bit brainwashed as well. She's kind of grown up with the descendants and doesn't really know what life is like outside. And I think that's true for a lot of us as well. We're very much products of the environment that we're brought up in. And I think you only have to look at the news to see how polarized almost every country in the world is somehow on some sort of political spectrum or religious spectrum or whatever. And so that was interesting for me to delve into. Obviously, like I grew up in Northern Ireland, which was a society that was very divided when I grew up. And so I did kind of draw a bit of inspiration from that as well with Fola. But I kind of wanted her by the end of the book that you feel that she's beginning to break out of that and start to think for herself a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think so often in fantasy, we have a character like the first one that we were talking about. I'm sorry, I don't recall the name. My apologies. The first character we were talking about, who's very steadfast in what she believes, right?
Oh, Gormla.
Gormla, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so often we have that kind of archetype as our main character. So it's really interesting to hear that you have a foil as someone who represents the everyday reader. Probably a lot of us are, like you said, closer to that character. And I think that's something that I don't see so often in this genre. You often see a character, for good or for ill, who's very strong in what they believe, not necessarily someone who doubts themselves as much. And it's great to hear that you're playing with that idea as well, because I feel like as a reader that can really help someone connect to the character. Be like, even though that might not be something I'm necessarily proud of about myself, I can connect to it because I know deep down that that's what I would have done as well.
Yeah. I think a lot of fantasy is now having female characters, which is brilliant. But traditionally, I think it was maybe more male centric. And then if you had one female character, they were normally kind of pedestaled a little bit. So they're like really cool and like warrior and like feisty and all these like really positive attributes, which is great. Like I love to see that as well. But I think if you're trying to write something, maybe like I am, because it's historical fantasy, so you're trying to really embed it in something that's quite realistic, I think it is good to have different types of female characters. So for me, it was very important that Gormla and Fola feel very different as characters. And like, it's very funny because some people are so team Gormla and they love her, and then the other half are like so team Fola and hate Gormla. And so I like to see that as well. And I think that's like, I've done it right then if people are split on them, because that's the way I've written them, that they are, both of them have their bad qualities, but they both have their very good, like strong qualities too. And so I want people to connect to one or both of them if they can.
Yeah, I am unabashedly Team Gorma. Sorry, I can't help it. She's awesome, and it's funny how we get attached to these certain characters, and we're rooting for them over characters. And it's not like Fola isn't a great character. It's just, you know, I gravitated towards Gormla, and I think with Gormla, I think, you know, there's some things she does that are pretty reprehensible. She's not opposed to, you know, seduction, lies, even, you know, bloody murder to get what she wants, and basically what she wants is her son to be in power, but she also wants to secure her position as well. And I think the biggest thing I saw from her, she wants to be relevant, she wants to matter, you know, even though she knows that the kind of relevance is fleeting, right? Yeah. But she, you know, because well, I don't want to spoil too much, she has to keep starting over, right? So she knows whatever she achieves here is going to be fleeting, and then she's going to have to move on, right? So, but I think part of it is that she's often, you know, we talked in the beginning about this whole patriarchal, you know, society of ancient times. Like, she's often thwarted in her schemes by the power plays of the dominant males that surround her. In some ways, she's not someone who's going to let herself be at anyone's mercy, but because of the society, she is at the mercy of men to agree, and she's used the commodity. She's very good looking. She's used the commodity for her looks, or, you know, of course, you know, with dynastic marriages and things, for, you know, for her womb essentially, and she's a pawn for a lot of these rulers and lords who want these political alliances, and marriage to beautiful women was one of the things that drew, you know, that drew these alliances, these dynastic marriages. But she's not willing to just be a benefit for whichever man controls her, right? So she fights back, like the only way she knows how. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what, like, my lovely wife, it's funny, she's reading the draft of my current novel. She's saying, you know, I like the way you do female characters here, but you know what? I'd really love to see a female character that is like this in terms of a certain aspect. I won't say it because it's kind of a spoiler, but and I agreed with her. And I thought, and it's funny, I had actually thought that I had written a character a certain way, but with my wife's perspective as a woman, she's like, well, I didn't see her that way at all. And when I went back overall and read stuff, she's like, you know what? You're right. And that's why I feel like, you know, having powerful female characters written from women is important to get all those nuances and those perspectives. But yeah, so quickly back to Gormla. Gormla was that person who, you know, although there was some evil in what she was doing, you could understand the whys, and that's, I think, was what you wrote so well about her. You can understand the whys of her person.
Yes, that's very important, because I don't want her to be, like, when she does something bad, I don't want it to be kind of like mustache twirling badness, like for the sake of it. You know, she does terrible things, and some things are really terrible, but they're always for a reason, you know. And everyone around her is also doing quite terrible things. So I would say probably her sense of morality is somewhat skewed by the environment that she is living in.
I feel like often well-written characters they don't have to do the right thing. They just have to do something that is consistent with the character that you've gotten to know. So as long as it's consistent, I would say that's beautiful. That's beautiful character work.
Yeah. Character-driven novels have always been my favorites. I like intensely dislike it when you're with a character and then you can tell that they've just done something because the plot needed them to do it. Like, nothing annoys me more. So so keeping the characters consistent is important for me. Yeah,
definitely. As a reader, I can agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Yeah, And I know I have to force myself to, not because I don't love Fola, but because I'm such a Gorma fan. I want to talk a bit more about Fola as well. Like she's, because as I said, when you compare and contrast these characters, there could be you might perceive Fola as more passive, and compared to Gormla. It doesn't mean that she's weak. I just found that she's more of an observer. She's more like cerebral in her approach. Fola can be impetuous sometimes, but like she's not a bystander, right? And she just doesn't want to like. And I don't know how you feel about the show. Like my perception is that she doesn't want to just insert herself in the middle of happenstance to like just cause turmoil. Like she wants to kind of stop turmoil. Like that's the way I saw her, and like, but she's still like an independent thinker. She's still, you know what I mean? Like she even starts to doubt the methods that her people are using to kind of preserve peace, like, and justifies the means kind of thing. And I but as I said, Gormla thrives on being the center of turmoil, and Fola wants the opposite, right? Like, was that also purposeful the way you wrote that?
Yes, because I wanted them just to be like very different people, especially because I was writing in first person. So I never wanted you to open the book and like get more than 2 paragraphs in and be like, oh, who is this? Like, I want you to know. So Gormla is, so she likes to be center of attention. She knows she's smart and clever. She wants Citric to do what she says. And she's very vocal in that. So she will tell him. Fola, on the other hand, is someone that doesn't tell people what to do. She is more kind of lives her life the right way, or tries to. And so perhaps she's someone that would maybe lead by example, if that makes sense, which is very different to Gormla's style. And so in the first book, you see her, even though she's, as you say, a bit more passive, whenever she speaks to Mirka, who does have power, she does challenge him. She's not like, everything you're doing is great, and because you're like a prince of Munster, I'll just go along with it, whatever you say. She doesn't. That's important. And I think that often is, again, in real life, individually, we don't have power to change things. And I think, again, maybe this is sort of me taking on a modern day problem, but a lot of people, if they feel they're not being listened to, or they're an individual, and what can they do on social media, it feels like people then start to shout. And I find always myself that is counter constructive. When you start shouting at people and telling them they're wrong, for me, it's always been better. And I've always been more influenced by people that just act the way that they think people should. Because you watch them and then you think, oh, why are they doing that? And then you can process kind of if you agree with it or not. And I often find that is a better way to be. So that is Fola. She's been thrown into this kind of new society, and she's being quiet because she wants to keep her nephew with her, but she won't say the wrong thing if she kind of truly believes it. And that's important too. And I think that's a hard thing to do. It's sometimes hard when you're having a conversation with someone who's maybe your superior or above you, and you challenge them. That in real life, that's one of the hardest things to do. And so I think for Fola, that's sort of one of the ways that her bravery does come through, where she challenges people on why they're doing what they are.
I think it's great that you're showing different kinds of strength, because it's not always visible to everyone, right? When you show strength, it is leading by example in many cases, or doing things in private that no one knows that you do. So I do think that's really makes me happy to hear that that's being shown on the page, because I think I agree with you. I think we maybe have a very similar way that we think about going about things. So it just makes me happy that both of them are represented on screen in such a multifaceted way.
Yeah. Well, that was what I was going for anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like you succeeded to me.
Definitely. And you know, Shauna, I know we've talked about the characters, and again, both Taylor and myself, we consider ourselves character-based readers. But you know, I don't want to. We have to point out that in the this is a character role, but in the background, there's this massive, epic, you know, thing going on. There's a conflict. There's the Viking attempt to colonize Ireland. Even more than that, there's this magical conflict that's happened. You know, which both Gormla and Fola, they're on opposite sides
Yes.
of this conflict and this upheaval. You know, where the Fomorians and the Tuath the Danan, they're, you know, it's very reminiscent of the Norse gods with the Aesir versus the Vanir and conflicts like that in mythological conflicts. And then there's all these other themes like religious conversion and opting to choose one faith or another for political experience rather than genuine faith. That was also something that I really found was really great thematically in the book. But there's a lot of big stuff going on here, right? Like the exploration between, as you said, the turbulence where the Irish and the Vikings are they're having this clash of cultures and like, you know, so was that, but for you as a writer, was that the main thing that was going on? Or was it all about how the characters fit into in these huge you know, these huge themes?
Well, in terms of the history, it is quite accurate as far as what I when I did my research, and for the historical characters, I'm following what happened. And so yeah, you're like, I mean, this era of Irish history is really, really exciting and eventful, right? So the Vikings have settled into some of the ports like Dublin, and they're marrying into the Irish royal families, so that they're almost becoming like Viking Irish. And so you have conflicts between the Irish and the Vikings, the Irish and the Irish, and then some of the Irish are trying to use the Vikings to fight against their Irish enemies. And so it's just this wonderful kind of melting pot of chaos, which to me then, as you're saying, it's like the backdrop, right? And it's a very colourful backdrop to have because there's so much conflict and Gormla's scheming. You know, it felt very authentic to me because all those battles that you read in the first book, they all happened, and all the kind of double that we see, like a lot of that happened. So yeah, so it's a fantastic backdrop. It's a little known, it's not a very well known period of history. Some people in Ireland will know about this era, but I would dare say outside Ireland, almost nobody would know about this time. So that was also very interesting for me to be able to put Irish history at the forefront. And I've had loads of people message me about reading the book and then going on like a Wikipedia search of all the characters. So that's fun as well, that, you know, people are interested enough to delve the story. Yeah.
I love that. And not only is it historical fantasy, but you also talk about your love of mythology. You even have a blog, right, where you talk about different forms of mythology, specifically of Ireland. As someone else who has a serious love of mythology, I do a lot of research into the Japanese stories over here. Where did your love of mythology start? What inspired that deep love that you have, that it became such a core part of your story?
Well, whenever I was younger, my granny would write stories that would be based on Irish folklore. And like I would be I was the character in one of her stories, and my nephew was, and my other cousins were characters as well. And so that was the start, because they were just fun stories, but they had Irish folklore in them. So there'd be like fairies and leprechauns and things like that. And so that just kind of sparked that interest, I guess. And then when I was older, I started to read other stories from the Irish mythology. Well, there's so many cycles of Irish mythology. You could read it for weeks, really. But I started to read all those other stories, and it's just very interesting. And again, very different to the Ireland that I grew up in, because Ireland was very, very, I suppose, religious when I was growing up, right? And kind of quite like strict, shall we say, you know, but Irish mythology is it's like chaos as well, right? And, you know, people are having affairs all over the place, and like not like having relationships and not being married. And so Irish mythology then kind of almost was a bit scandalous, if that would sort of make sense. And so I find that very interesting, that this is kind of all Irish history, and it's all there. People like it, but a lot of people don't really deep dive into mythologies, if maybe that makes sense. And but then I would also say in Ireland, there's people who are really into mythology. So kind of it was quite easy then to find my people, as it were, to find friends who were also into Irish mythology. And even at a kind of, on like another level, like if you were to come to Ireland, there's Irish mythology on the murals on walls. There's Irish mythology in songs that we would have here, in poetry and stories. Definitely been an Irish language revival in Ireland recently, which with it has come like a bigger interest in Irish, because I know when I was younger reading it, I didn't know too many other people who read it, whereas now I feel like more people are interested in Irish mythology. And so it is everywhere. Like even in the names of mountains and rivers and stuff, there's often Irish mythological goddesses or gods that kind of are what the rivers or mountains are named after. So it's everywhere, really. And I just sort of felt that over the years, I've absorbed it. And then whenever I came to writing this story, I just thought it would be a really cool way to insert Irish mythology into a fantasy story, rather than using it as a sort of a basis. So if you would look at like Lord of the Rings, there's loads of Irish mythology in Lord of the Rings. There's some in Wheel of Time, although I know Robert Jordan used lots of world mythologies and kind of mashed it all together and did his own thing with it. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have a story where the like proper Irish mythology was used, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does, and it was so exceptionally well done. And I, you know, it's funny when you read a historical fiction book, and again, you mentioned that perhaps some of the periods, the time frames that you use in your book aren't as well known as other periods in history. But it was such an education for me, who thought I knew something about Irish that period, and you know, and to be educated so much in that book for me was wonderful too. And I love books where I learn, right? And obviously, Shauna, your research was impeccable. It was awesome. Was it now? I guess the beauty of writing historical fiction is you get to play with and have your own versions and interpretations of these characters. So obviously, I'm curious how, obviously, with your own interpretations overlaid over top of what the historical details, we'll never really know exactly what these people were like. However, right, how accurately do you feel, or how accurately did you try to stay in terms of your depictions of these characters like Fodla and Gorflick? How, you know, these kings, how accurately did you try to stick with what you had learned about them through your research?
I did try to stick quite to it as hard as I could. Like it is, even in historical fiction, I think like people deviate from what happens, because you have to imagine some things. And of course, all the historical records that you have normally are biased in some way, right? So you have to take that into account. But because this was historical fantasy, and I was adding all these fantastical elements, I actually find that sticking to the history helped me. because it was sort of the anchor of the story. So all the events are almost pretty historically accurate. So then you get to the characterization. The thing is, at this period of time, there aren't many source documents. There's about 2 main ones. And so it gives you a lot of free rein. But when people were characterized and time was taken to do that within the source documents, I didn't want to veer too far away, which is, again, if we go back to Gormla, and I said, you know, obviously the source documents, neither of them like Gormla. And they say actually quite similar things about her, that she's a schemer, warmonger, very beautiful, but kind of incites people to do bad things. I thought, no, I'm not going to change that. I'm not going to try to make her more sympathetic. I'm going to stick to the historical record. And the point is going to be not that she's being misrepresented. It's actually that the men in the story are made into heroes for doing the same thing. That's more the point that I've kind of played around with in the series. And then the historical information that I have is stronger for the 3rd book in the trilogy. That's when lots of the source documentation records a lot more detail. So for book 3, I did try to stick tight to what we know about the characters at the time. So Gormla is one of them. King Brian Brew would be another one, and Citric Silkbeard, who is the King of Dublin. Malmorda, who's Gormla's brother, and Merca. They would be the kind of key historical characters that we would have documentation about during that period. So for them, I did try to stick to what we know.
Yeah. Do you think that in historical fiction in general, I know everybody has different tastes, but I know for me, I like that feeling of a writer taking some authorial license to kind of play with things about a character that aren't necessarily historically accurate according to the records we have. And as you said, different accounts can, for political reasons, for example, lean differently. You talk about Shakespeare. He had to portray certain royal figures in the past a certain way because of the queen that was sitting on the throne at the time of him writing it. He didn't want to make her upset because, obviously that could be bad for him and get him shut down or even imprisoned. So he had to reflect, for example, her ancestors in the War of the Roses a certain way versus the other side. So making one side the good side, the queen, that he has to be with her family's side, the goodies, and the others, the baddies. And that happens. But as a writer, do you prefer, and as a reader, do you prefer when you feel that this historical, whether it's historical fiction, historical fantasy, this representation is fairly accurate? However, the writer did take some artistic license, or do you like when it's more, hey, you have the basic character, maybe some chronological data, born this time, died this time. However, the character is pretty well the author's own invention and isn't tied so closely to what history says about them, like presenting an alternate view of what they could have been like, or simply just the author's own unique representation. What do you prefer as a writer or a reader?
Ooh, well, I think if you're doing historical fiction, I think it's best to stick as tight as you can, purely because I think if you don't want to do that, you'd be better to insert a non-historical character into a historical world, and then you can do what you want with them. So say, for example, you were writing about Elizabeth I, Tudor Queen of England. If you don't want to stick tight to what she is doing during that time period, why don't you have the main character be like one of her servants, right? And then you can have all sorts of like other incidents happening, and you can put different perspectives into it. But the thing is, though, like no matter how tight you want to stick to history, sometimes when you're writing a fictional piece, you can't. It could be just, there's 30 years between two incidences, and that's too long a period for a book to be over. Or it could be, I don't know, the way this character is described by the Spanish ambassador is very biased, and I don't want to follow that. There's lots of reasons why you would veer away from historical documents. But I think if you play around with it too much, you will unravel I don't know, like it will start to become fantastical rather than historical. And it's like a line that you have to tread. It depends what you want to do, though. I mean, there is no rules when it comes to writing. You really can do whatever you want. But for me, because I was adding fantastical elements, I actually find sticking to the history more tightly helped me. But maybe if I didn't have those fantastical elements there, I would have felt freer with the history. I just don't know. I think as long as it all makes sense and you haven't completely gone off tangent too much, you're fine.
Well, hearing you talk about writing, it's clearly a craft, right? The balance between these different points that you want to bring into your story and how you do that. And the ultimate result takes a lot of revisions and work. And I noticed that in your online presence, you mentioned a couple times that you've written for your whole life, but it became something serious for you about 6 years ago. And I'm curious, what was the catalyst to make you want to bring your story to the world? Finally, officially?
Oh, gosh, so many things. I think, so I had been writing my whole life. And then like from I was about 6 or 7, I would have been writing stories. I always did that. That was my hobby. Reading and writing were my hobbies. And I did that right up until my early 20s. And then I went traveling and I got married and I had children and a full-time job. And then probably like everyone in that situation, you find that the time for your hobbies just suddenly start to shrink and drift away. And by the time I had reached 30, I had really not been writing very much at all for like maybe 4 or 5 years. And it was actually at my 30th birthday party, my husband's uncle was there and he had read some of my earlier stories, which I'd written when I was like 19, 20, 21. And he just asked me, he goes, is there another story that you've written that I can read? I really liked the stuff that you did. And I said, oh, no, I have no time to write anymore. And he told me off. He was like, well, that's ridiculous. You do have time to write. You just need to find it and write. It's a shame that you're not writing anymore. And so I was a bit annoyed that he said that to me to start off with, because, having 2 kids and a full-time job and all of that, like, there is really not a lot of time. But kind of annoyed me. And then I realized he was right. And me and my husband then had a conversation where we agreed that we would take turns doing the bedtime routine with the children. So every other night I would have an hour and a half to write. And that's kind of what got me back into writing. And I think, when I was a teenager and I was writing, I could write all day. I could literally wake up at 8 a.m. and write until 10 p.m. And in those 5 years, 6 years where I hadn't written, it was because I sort of felt, oh, well, I can't write in half an hour. I can't write in an hour. I'll get nothing done. It would take too long. But by the time I'd hit 30, I kind of realized, well, but yes, I want to write. And actually, it doesn't matter how long it takes me to do things, or even if I ever complete anything, I actually just need to make time for enjoyment. So that was really the first step. There was no notion at that point of writing a novel. It was just taking time to write, to enjoy myself, and to start doing a hobby that kind of I had grown up always loving. So that was the start of it. And I wrote for about 4 or 5 years. That was really just relearning how to write, learning how to edit. I was on a website called Critique Circle, which is a website where you can put chapters of your work up and people will read it, but in exchange you have to read their work. I always say that because I find that very useful, actually helping me improve as a writer. So I did lots of that stuff for a long time, and it was really just having fun. And then it was only when I wrote The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, and I finished that I thought, oh, like, this is actually quite good. I should maybe have a go at trying to get it published. I sort of half-heartedly tried a novel before that, but I sort of knew myself that it wasn't really publishable, but I thought The Children of Gods and Fighting Men was. So yes, and I just sort of started to send it off, and I wasn't really very hopeful that I would get published. I mean, everything you read tells you how hard it is. So I think, yeah, just it was a bit of luck. It was good timing, and all of that. But it was also, I think all those years I'd spent just on having fun and learning the craft had helped too. But yeah, so that was sort of my writing journey into getting published.
I love that it started with just a little bit of self-care, right? Getting back into what we love, because I think all of us know, being in the reading and writing world, it's full of just people with passion, because it is not where the money is for the majority of the people. And so, to just hear you talk about the passion driving you through in the beginning to just want to do it, that really checks out, because I think a lot of people in this space feel the same way about the craft and the work that people put into it. I'm so happy that you've seen returns on all of that work, because clearly you had something good in the end. But I love that it started with just indulging in a bit of self-care.
Well, yes, and I think, if the book hadn't been published, like, I would still be writing. And I think that sometimes is difficult. I think sometimes writers get very bogged down in books not selling, and then it tarnishes their enjoyment of writing. And I always stress, like, really keep submitting your work as like a separate activity to writing, and don't if you have a book that's out in sub and it doesn't do very well, don't let that tarnish your enjoyment, because you'll improve. Your next book will be better, or you can self-publish. Lots of people do that, and there's lots of amazing self-published books, and lots of self-published books are self-published because of like marketing reasons, not anything to do with quality, right? So so there's lots of options these days for getting your work out there, but number one always should be to enjoy the writing. If you're not enjoying the writing, or you're letting outside things tarnish your enjoyment, then you need to kind of look at that and kind of try to preserve your joy.
Yeah, that's so well said, Shauna. That's fantastic. Wise words. Just want to quickly, because Chris had come back and said trying to move things around to make it, for fingers crossed, that would be for Glasgow World Convention in Fantasy in 2024. So hopefully Chris can make it, as well as hopefully be seeing Shauna and perhaps even Taylor there. And just a quick John A. Douglas, another wonderful booktuber and member of the community. Hey, John A., thanks for stopping by. Says good morning, chat and hosts alike. On that vein, Shauna, of all the things that you just said, and you're very humble, but not to embarrass you, but you're a wonderful member of the community yourself. You are so supportive of other writers, self-published and traditionally published. You're such an active and engaged member. You write great reviews. I read some reviews, and you very much are someone who believes in uplifting people in the community and focusing on the positive, and that's really important. So, and in saying that, you have read a lot of great, you're well read. Obviously, you've read a lot of great fantasy, traditionally published, self-published. Again, I've seen some reviews. What are some of the books that are making you buzz? Your book makes a lot of people buzz about it, and buzz about your series and all the stuff that we anticipate to come. What are some of the books that you've read recently, some of the authors that have made you buzz about?
Oh, okay. Oh, there's so many. You're putting me on the spot. I really, really liked Sons of Darkness by Gurhav Mahanti. And I know that started out as self-published. And then it actually got took on by Head of Zeus, who's my publisher, and it's so good. If anybody wants a kind of Game of Thrones style book, but that's set in India and has Indian mythology, that's a real top recommendation. Because I like things that are different. As I say, when you read lots of books, for me, I don't like things that are too tropey, or I like them to be spun a little bit. So his book was brilliant. I read Dark Water Daughter recently by Hannah Long, and that's brilliant. That's a really, really enjoyable read. What else have I read recently? I really like Anthony Ryan's latest series. I think it's called The Covenant of Steel. The last book is called The Traitor. The first one is The Pariah. That's a very, very good series that I've just read. But there's so many good books at the minute. Like, I feel like I'm spoiled for choice. You know, I could read 60 different books this year. But I normally only get to read about 30. I read about 2 to 3 books a month. But if I could read 10 books a month, I would still have like the most amazing books to read. So we're very lucky at the minute, I think, in science fiction and fantasy. Oh, and also, sorry, while I'm talking about science fiction, I'm reading Demon in White at the minute by Christopher Rocchio, which is the Sun Eater series, and that's amazing. So if anybody wants a sci-fi rec, that's a great series to get started into.
I've heard amazing things about that series. I was this close to starting it, and then I just got distracted by other things, but it's been on my like peripheral TBR, the never-ending TBR, but it has been on there.
Yeah, my TBR is never ending too. It's a problem, but you have to start that. Empire of Silence is brilliant. Yep. Howling Dark is even better. Demon in White, I'm only maybe about 15% through that at the minute, but it started off amazing as well. So yeah,
those are some great
truly heard phenomenal things. And just because I recently checked all of your socials and was like creeping on you a little bit, I did see that you were also reading the Greenbone Saga, which is one of my favorite series of all time. So I just want to say, yay! I hope you're enjoying yourself.
Yes, Jade City was brilliant, very, very good. I really enjoyed that. So yes, I've started Jade War. I'm terrible. I'm one of these people that really should only read about 2 books at a time, and then sometimes I end up reading about 4 or 5. So, which is never good because I need to try to focus a bit more. But yes, Jade's War is being read at the minute, and it's brilliant. You know, of course it is.
Yeah. Well, Fondali is one of my favorites. She's not a bio author for me, but it's funny to hear you say that you're in the middle of a bunch of books. And typically, I'm also pretty good at keeping myself to 1 audiobook, 1 ebook, 1 physical book. But recently, I've been mood reading all over the place, and I'm in the middle of like 5 books. So I feel you on that. There's something in the water recently where I'm just picking up things left and right. But PL really did just steal the question out of my mouth about reading, because we're on the same wavelength as usual, that you're not only a writer but a reader, and you also do put out very comprehensive reviews. And I'm wondering, since you kind of straddle both sides of this world as a reader and a writer, does that affect the way that you review books, do you think? Do you take a different approach possibly because you know what it's like to be on both sides?
Yes, I think so. I mean, well, I don't put out bad reviews anymore. So it's not that every book I read, I review, if that kind of makes sense. If there's a book I'm not enjoying, I just don't talk about it because I just don't want to put that negative energy out there to fellow authors, if that makes sense. Whereas if I wasn't an author, that maybe wouldn't bother me so much. And I always say, like, silence about a book is worse than negative reviews. I always think to be part of the conversation is better. You know, it's better to be spoken about. But yeah, so I just think in general it's better to be kind. You know, even if you're reading a book and it's not for you, so much work has gone into that book. And so I think, you know, sometimes you read the kind of Simon Cowell-esque reviews that are really mean, and you're like, there's just no need. If it's not for you, or if it's a 1 star, you don't have to like completely savage the book or get personal. But do you know what? Like, people can do what they want to. When you put art out there, you're asking for people to look at it or to read it or to watch it. And so you have to expect anything, really, you know. That's part of putting your work out there. So no, for me, but so I suppose, yeah, for me, I'm an author. I don't want to put out negative reviews, but that's just sort of my decision to have done that.
Yeah, I commend you for that, Shauna, and for Taylor and myself. We're also reviewers and bloggers and assistant editors with Before We Go Blog. Shout out to Beth Tyler, by the way, and all our peeps at Before We Go Blog. Hey, everybody. Yeah, and I think part of what I've realized as both an author and a reader is that not only is there a book for everyone, as you said, and even if it's not your thing, doesn't mean that the author hasn't put a significant amount of work into the book and that it can't be for someone else, but that every book literally has its audience, and people, when you write a review, that book may not be for you, but everything that you disliked about the book, someone else will like. And we talk about this all the time on Page Two, and Taylor and I, that a certain review can actually draw more people to your work, the people that those negative things for them were positive. And that's something that more and more as I write reviews, before I was much more reticent, to be honest with you, to put anything negative in a review. But I think now it's more about highlighting the things that, hey, I did like this, but you might like that. And that's become very much of how I've kind of slightly altered my approach to writing reviews. I too I normally try to be positive. And I've also gotten to the point in my life, a gray beard now, being a granddad, that I'm much better at knowing myself, my tastes, and selecting books that I know already are going to be 4 and 5 star reads, rather than just selecting books that are more speculative in terms of whether I'm going to like them or not. So hence, a lot of my reviews are really endorsing positive, because I took a lot of care to select those books, knowing that they sound right up my alley. Yours was one of them. Just knowing that, from what I read the cover, from what I saw of your presence on social media and what other people were saying, a lot of people I respect, like, the brothers Gwynn and Phil Chase, etc. They said a lot of great things about your book. So, it was easy for me to, to sell, just like, and I'm sure that may be the same for you. I think it's the same for Taylor, but yeah, it's very much, with what's happening in the book sphere right now, as you said, with positivity in our space. We want to keep that going, and part of that is reviewing books, and part of that is what we say about the books that we read, and how we communicate that. There's so much more to love about any book than there is not to like it, regardless of how it's written or what it is, right? So I think that's really important. Oh, I just want to quickly put up that another great friend, Angie, the bookaholic. Angie is wonderful, amazing booktuber. She does some great stuff on Wheel of Time, especially. I'm with Angie and Jenny Wirtz and Nico from Nico's Book Reviews, and Blaze and Kona from Under the Radar Books, another blogger. We've been breaking down Jenny Wirtz' Wars of Light and Shadow series per book. So check out Angie's channel. She's got what great content, and that specific deep dive that we're doing, I think, is something, especially if you haven't heard about Jenny Wirtz, and she's my favorite author, phenomenal author. Check out Angie. Thanks, Angie, for stopping by. I want to quickly ask Shauna, on the vein of preference for books and our genres. So you write historical fantasy. You certainly read fantasy, sci-fi. Looks like you have a great diverse mix of reading. So what's your favorite genre? Is it?
Oh, it's really hard. I read lots of genres. I don't just read. Fantasy would be my preferred genre, and then it would probably be historical fiction, and then it would be sci-fi. But I do like literary. I do like romance sometimes. If I'm kind of like maybe not in having the greatest time, a romance, it can always cheer me up. I wouldn't read a lot of crime and thriller, but I have. I think it's good to read outside your genre sometimes. I know Sunny Dean, who wrote The Book Eaters, she read a lot of thrillers, and I think she said it helped her. Is that like with plot momentum and kind of keeping things quite tight, which thrillers, you have to do that in a thriller. So no, it's always good to read outside. But that fantasy is my favorite, but historical fiction would be a very close second.
Taylor, what about you? What is, I don't think I've ever asked you this. What is your favorite genre or subgenre? Like, what is it like?
Well, definitely fantasy. If you can't tell from my shelves, like surprise, surprise, it's definitely my wheelhouse. But just like Shauna said, I think it's important to read a lot of different genres. So while fantasy will always be the home that I kind of come back to, and probably longer epic fantasy, um, recently I've been delving into a lot of different genres. Actually, when I was in the States, I didn't want to bring any of my heavy books, with me. So of course I have my ebook library, but those don't count, right? So I got to go book shopping. And so I picked up a lot of literary, even some contemporary. I read Pet by Kweke Emezi, and that has gotten a lot of really good reviews. I loved that book. So I think, just like Shauna said, reading outside of your genre not only gets you a refreshing view on things, but it also makes you more appreciative of your wheelhouse when you come back to it. So I feel a lot more ready to read fantasy now that I've kind of taken a little bit of a break from it for the last month, I think. Although I do have a couple other books that I picked up on a whim that I'll probably be reading in between the larger things. But yeah, definitely fantasy, no question.
Yeah, it's funny that, and that's awesome, Taylor. Like, fantasy is the genre, it's my go-to. And when I started reading, it was definitely, it was the first genre that I fell in love with. And then I've talked about those where I went through periods where is more police procedurals, crime fiction, mysteries, specifically because of the career I was in. But then I wove my way back to fantasy. But historical fiction was always kind of lurking in the background. These books that I would, once in a while, I'd dive into a historical fiction book, and I would lose myself in it, and then decide to buy a whole series if it was a series and just read that. And I think as I get older, historical fiction specifically is emerging as it could become my go-to favorite. I think once I'm done writing, maybe, and done reading and blogging, and maybe I'm just sitting in my rocking chair and I'm just reading for pure pleasure, I think historical fiction, I'm a big history buff. I think that could overtake fantasy one day. I'm predicting, and it's books like Shauna's that are helping me that happen. But I can see myself getting more into the Ken Follett's, and I can definitely see how it'll become more popular with me personally as time goes on. So definitely. Now, Shauna, I know we can't give away too many spoilers, but congratulations again with the new book coming out. So can you tell us a bit about that book and how it relates to the first book, how the follow-up, is tied into Children of Gods and Fighting Men?
So it starts straight after. So Gormala has a new husband. And so we're kind of getting to grips with that situation because she's not too happy about it. And I suppose she looks at all the scheming that she did in book one and realizes she schemed often for other people and is maybe now starting to think that she should start scheming for herself. So that's sort of her thought processes in her first few chapters. I won't go beyond that. And then for Fola, so obviously at the end of book one, she had to make a big decision. And so she now has to deal with the consequences of the decision that she made, which was to use her magic against the laws of the descendants of her kind. So she broke that rule, so now she has to deal with some consequences. And that's kind of how her arc opens. And you kind of in the first book, as I said, she was quite maybe frightened at times and didn't kind of know how to kind of put herself forward, but always tried to act in the right way. And so that's what she did at the end of the book. She acted how she thought she should. And so I think we're going to see her challenge some of these beliefs that she's had when she was younger. You're going to see that a bit more. But some people from her past are not going to be too happy about that. So there you go. That's all I can say.
It sounds awesome. I cannot wait to get it. I'm hoping it's already in Canada, so I can run it. This is a year where the last time I've been trying to get the draft of my own work done and off and get to the editor and stuff, and I'm almost there. And also, I'm so behind on all my reviews, all of my ARC reviews. I'm devoting the rest of the year to basically reading ARC reviews. So I'm only going to selectively read books that other books, inspiration. But your second book, Shauna, is I want to fit that in before the end of the year because I still want to read it. Words of Kings and Prophets. I think when you talk about the second book, so one thing that I noticed about the first book, we talked earlier about how your series, for a lot of people, myself included, it's very reminiscent of The Last Kingdom, and really that's a series that I love. In your books, one difference I found, the battle scenes were somewhat muted, like with more like reported than actually witnessed, but there's so much like high engaging drama and all this, the collusion and the conniving that Children of Gods, the Fighting Men, the entertainment value is really high, right? You're really always engaged and intrigued, right? Is there going to be, are we going to see? But you did talk about, the battles that occurred, and like you said, these are historically accurate times, dates, etc. The outcomes. Will there be more of that in the second book, and perhaps the third, if you can say? Like, will there be more concentration on around these battles that happened that were historically significant?
Okay, so the kind of main event that book 2 and book 3 were of Glenmama, and I don't want to spoil the events in books 2s and 3s, but they are historical events. That's all I can say.
Okay. I'm good with that. We're good with that. We'll read. I'm good with just reading it and see what happens. So it makes me very excited to hear though that's the case. So I just wanted to also just quickly put up earlier, but Angie's comment: love Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. Angie, if you love Ken Follett, read Shauna's books. You will not be disappointed. Awesome historical fiction.
I loved Pillars of the Earth as well. It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, and of course Ken Follett, a master of historical fiction, probably one of the world's best known authors in that genre. I just wanted to also make a comment, Shauna, about your work. Like, I feel like, because you set this world up, because the world building essentially for a historical fiction book is an accurate depiction of the world that actually existed, in previous times, right? And your research is first rate, from what I can see, and I really enjoyed the fact that you really captured the court politics and the jockeying for power and the double crosses, and also one thing I picked up was the misinformation aspect, that you may have information about this event and it's done a certain way to present a certain side favorably, but then the other side has some totally different information, and also it creates this perception especially between cultures and between especially the magic powers in the book, that they feel, okay, well, this side is bad or this side is good, but it's so much is how it's presented. Was that something that you were aiming to come out in the book?
Yeah, I think I always find that so interesting. Like, the side that you're on is the good side, therefore the other side are the bad side, and actually, and that's a very simplistic way to look at things. But if you're a curious person, or maybe if you get older, you can start to challenge those beliefs, and sometimes you can be, oh, like my side did some pretty bad things, or we're maybe not so good as I originally thought. And so I always find that interesting, kind of where you're challenging perceptions and how an historical event from one side can be viewed as a victory, and from the other side it could be viewed as like something hideous and like an invasion. So if you look at just like World War II and the dropping of the atomic bomb was in Japan, kind of reading that growing up, it was like, oh, that was a good thing because it ended the war. But actually, when you delve more into it, you're like, whoa, that was something pretty crazy that aside, and it caused a huge loss of life, and maybe it wasn't so good. And so there's lots of ethical questions when you start to talk about wars. It's very rare that a war is a good war, right? Wars normally take place for land, for money, for some arbitrary objectives. So people die as a result. So I find it very interesting always to kind of view things from both perspectives and try to think, well, why would someone do this? People aren't naturally evil, I don't think, or most people aren't. So why would people go along with this? Why would people have supported this? What were they being told? Or, did they think it was good for them? Did they think the end justified the means and all of that? So there's just so many ethical questions that you can ask yourself. And obviously in my world, slavery is a key issue. And that's very interesting to look at because slavery obviously has existed almost throughout history. And even today, there's like modern day slavery where we know there are people who are living as slaves. And so, but why would people have gone along with that? People can't possibly have thought that this was good. So why do it? Why did people capture people? Why did people buy people? Why did people allow other people to be bought and sold on their land? So that there's just, I just find all those questions and all those thought processes interesting. And as we said earlier, like there are issues that existed 1,000 years ago that still exist today. And it's kind of interesting to think about why people did it and what they thought about it and maybe how that differs to today. Maybe it does differ to how we think about things today, but I usually think we don't differ that much.
Yeah, it also kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier, that we tend to view history as, we are much smarter than those people now. But a lot of those people had multifaceted ways of viewing things. There were probably different factions that didn't even get written down in history that maybe opposed those certain things. You just happened to mention the dropping of the atomic bomb. And that's the first thing that came to my mind when you talked about that, because being an American, having lived in Japan for the last 8 years and married to a Japanese person, whenever that topic is discussed, if you go to any of the museums here, you would never know as an American what effect that had on the ground here. And even though that's just one prime example of it, that exists everywhere. So I think it's really important to view it from a multifaceted lens, because people in the past had that as well. Yeah.
And, I think as well, like, do you ever watch an interview on TV and then a few days later, all the one journalist will have said one key phrase, and then a few days later, all the journalists and all the media are saying that key phrase. And it's almost like sometimes like one viewpoint will somehow gain traction, even though at the start they weren't all saying it the same way, but then kind of the consensus comes in as to how something should be portrayed. And that happened in history. So often I think you're getting like a consensus or a mainstream opinion, but not everyone agreed with that opinion. Like the same way now, people are conflicted or believe different things and support different people. So I think so I think 1,000 years ago people had all those same issues that we do now, and often, like in Ireland, so Ireland didn't record a lot of its own history. It was recorded by other people. So one of the main sources for my novel is actually an Icelandic saga. Other information we have about Ireland at the time are like monks who came to Ireland and wrote letters to each other. And they did not like Ireland very much because Ireland hadn't converted to Christianity very well. So in Ireland at the time, you could divorce, you could have more than one wife. And so a lot of their opinions about Ireland are very, very negative, but only because of that. But then you're like, well, so it's you don't like Ireland because it doesn't agree with your religious ideals, but you haven't maybe looked beyond that. So that's why I talk about like propaganda and bias. It's everywhere, you know, and you have to look past that. As a historian, you know, and as a historical fiction writer, you have to look beyond the bias.
Yeah, those are such salient points from both you and Taylor. You're speaking to me, obviously. Taylor, who knows me well, knows that that's so much of what you both said, and it's so on point. That's why I write. That's what I write about. So you're really speaking to me in some of those things you were saying. It's such excellent points by both of you. So, you know, the time, it's, you know, Taylor and I say all the time, like, where does it go, man? We've all almost been talking for an hour and a half. So, Shauna, we want to respect your time. You've been so generous with it. It's so wonderful of you to come on the show. We can't thank you enough. I just want to give both you and Taylor an opportunity to do some parting words for Taylor, just to reiterate where we can find you, all of your social media platforms, etc. And of course for Shauna, all about the books and where we can buy the books and your social media platforms, etc. So Taylor, would you like to go first, and we'll give our guests the last word before I do some closing comments myself.
Sure. So as I mentioned in the beginning, my name is Taylor. My booktube channel is Made Between the Pages. I do also have a recent channel I made for my life in Japan, if you're interested in more of that kind of genre of content, and that is called Made in Transit. You can find all of my reviews either on my Goodreads or on Before We Go blog, which PL mentioned we are both assistant editors. Words left me there, I promise. I know what my title is, but we're both assistant editors over on Before We Go blog. You can find any of the links to any of those socials in the description of any of my videos. And of course, you can find me on page 2ing next to PL, either on my channel or on his channel. And thank you so much, Shauna, for joining us. You know, PL said it already, but you've been so generous with your time, and we really appreciate you coming on to talk to us. You've completely sold your book to me, by the way.
Oh, good.
Just well done there. So.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving up your time. You know, I think, as I said before, the SFF community is so good at that, at supporting each other and spending time to talk about new books and new authors, which is fabulous. So good.
Shauna, just where can we find you, and where can we buy your wonderful books? Just a little bit more, just remind us when the next one is coming out and what the title is and things of that nature.
Okay, so the best place to find me is really Twitter still, although I am on Instagram as well, and I have a newsletter and a blog. So my website is www.shaunalawless.com, so quite easy to find somewhere. The Word of Kings and Prophets is out. Right, so this is a bit complicated. It's out everywhere on ebook on the 14th of September. It's out in hardback in the UK and Europe on the 14th. It's out in North America on the 3rd of October in hardback. But you can get the ebook and the audiobook, I think, on the 14th. So kind of a few dates there. But either way, within the next couple of weeks, it's going to be out everywhere in all formats. So yeah. So, and then of course, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men is out everywhere in all formats. And any bookstore, you should be able to find it or order it in. The library as well. It's in a lot of libraries. So hopefully you should be able to find it somewhere.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Just quickly, just going backwards, the wonderful Stephen Arian, amazing author, booktuber, blogger, does such fantastic things in the community, especially regarding giving advice regarding publishing modes, traditional publishing versus self-publishing, etc. His last book, I was honored to get a copy of Judas Blossom.
Yeah, so good.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
you want to talk
really,
about,
really good book.
yeah, it's inspired by the Mongol invasions. Great stuff. He just said buy all of her books, and I think he had another comment. Book 1 available now everywhere, though. Yes, that is true. So, Children of Gods and Fighting Men, everything, everywhere. Just another quick one. Just Timothy Wolf had stopped by just to say hi. Timothy, awesome person, friend of the channel, and of course, everybody had commented how much they enjoyed it. Layla, thank you so much. She said she really enjoyed it. And Chris Mohan mentioned that he did as well. And said it was a wonderful chat, insightful, interesting, and lovely to see all of us doing well. Lovely to see you doing well, Chris. Thanks so much. And again, check out Chris's channel too. So quickly, I'm P.L. Stewart, the author of the Dragon Kingdom Saga, and you can find me, beside my wonderful, talented co-host Taylor, either on her channel or my channel, as she said, for page chewing. Can't believe this episode 52 just keeps rolling along. You can all, for the books, www.plstort.com. That's where you can find about the Dragon Kingdom Saga. 3 books currently out now, and the 4th one, Alliance Pride, coming out in the spring of 2024. Before I go blog, of course, as Taylor mentioned, for reviews and Goodreads, I have a review up of The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, a wonderful book and one of my favorites for the year. I plan to do a video review on my channel at some point of it, just a bit behind and all that stuff, but I will get a video review up of Shauna's book as well at some point down in the future. And social media wise, yeah, I'm still on Twitter or whatever it's called now, or what's left of it. I'm hanging on. So it's at PL Stewart Writes. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, not as frequently. They're both also at PL Stewart Writes, but Twitter or Exeter or whatever it is, that's typically where you can find me if you want to interact, talk about books, or have questions about my writing. So this was a wonderful time. Again, it was amazing. Shauna, thank you so much for coming. It's such an honor to have you here. It was wonderful to chat to you. We had a fantastic hour and a half long chat that like I said, it seemed like it was 10 minutes because we kept chatting. So Taylor, my wonderful co-host, thanks again for doing this. And we are so excited and honored to bring you Page Chewing, and we have a lot more great episodes planned for the rest of the year. So check it out, and I guess join Taylor and I back for episode 53 in the future. But episode 52 was phenomenal, having the wonderful best-selling historical fantasy author Shauna Lawless. So once again, everybody, thanks so much. Take care, and everyone in the chat, thanks for dropping by and participating. You're what makes this so amazing. All the people that tune in, and thank you so much for participating in your comments and your questions. So take care, everyone, and have a great night, evening, afternoon, wherever you are.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye. Thanks for joining.